differences and similarities between the East and the West, I was thinking for a long time about how to make this not very academic. And 2 Sundays ago, I was visiting with some friends at this particular temple in Singapore, in Upper Thomson Road, the Julie Tong Temple. And I came across a gentleman, this gentleman who is repairing something. And this little thing that is repairing, wow, it's actually quite interesting. I took a closer look at what exactly it is. It's actually a divination apparatus, right? It's a, you hold, the medium will hold the fork, and the one in the base, which is a brass pipe that is probably installed previously, was then to be written on sand plate for divination when the medium is actually being possessed by the deities. So here we are. So I talked to the craftsman who was actually a member of the temple, and he is actually repairing this particular piece. So how old is this piece? I was very excited about this. So probably around 3 generations in the possession of the temple. And there were cracks because the medium is very excited about right? And then there are cracks, and then he has applied some timber putty. And on this, there's a very nice patina. And as our conversation progressed, he also excited. He went to storeroom and took out a piece that is complete. He has completed the restoration, and this is it. Momentarily, I was shocked, to say the least. Momentarily, right? And why? Well, he's very proud, and he said that, well, I bought the best commercially available paint, actually the erase enamel paint. I paint on the timber. I buy very good gold leaf. I applied onto the head of a dragon. And this set me thinking that there is actually a very strong distinction between the Western approach towards restoration, which we are all inherited from, and the very way that the Eastern approach restoration. So what is restoration? And there's this region, especially in terms of this Chinese and Southeast Asian, there's a very strong tradition of practice in terms of restoration. And what should we then overemphasize the quality of the material of restoration? And perhaps after maybe decades of use, you will also achieve a certain patina, right? So, like I mentioned earlier, like the keynote speaker which talked to us about doctrines of restoration throughout the years. And right now, in modern day, essentially, we have 2 different diverging approaches, the positivist and relativist, which is the substantiation of the historic material fabric and privileges the object, which we inherit this kind of traditions and philosophy of restoration, and also relativist, which is a premise on the idea that we should go beyond the consideration of the material, culture, and fabric. And all these are actually very well-known ideas, the positivists, which started again with the Western world, John Ruskin, the idea, and then of course the relativists started with the example given by Japan. And in 1994, you have the Nara document of authenticity widely discussed, and subsequently the Bura Charter also talked about giving privileges beyond the material fabric. I would like to mention something which I was also toying very much, that perhaps in this particular region, the different approaches of conservation, we need to promote the idea of conservation as the idea of merit making. Not so much of the concept of restoration, not so much of the concept of renovation or addition to a building as merit making. And especially in the areas of Buddhism and Taoism ideas that when you add on to a religious site, it's a form of merit making. So perhaps there's a shift in kind of a mentality, a psychological shift, a conceptual shift towards the idea of conservation. Of course, in Singapore, we are quite blessed. Since 1980s, we have started the role of conservation, and the principle is highly distilled 3R methods, which is maximum retention, sensitive restoration, and careful repair, which most consultants in Singapore is widely familiar with. And it's actually made this highly distilled, so it's easy digestible, easy to understand, and applied to consultants and even the lay people and owners aside. These formulas, these 3R principles had its origins from the positivist kind of principles and approaches that I mentioned earlier. So here we are, which later maybe Ms. Mei-Cho will give a full picture of the restoration history of Singapore. And what had happened was that the guidelines that were prepared either for restoration and conservation were essentially based on these positivist ideas. I would like to mention one example which in such different approaches of conservation has serious conflicts in recent years. The case of Tan Si Chong Shu or Chen Si Zhong Ci in 1999 to 2002. In 2003, Singaporeans wake up in November to newspaper articles, is it? Charge over temple changes, temple official accused of illegal changes to the monument. So what is this, right? The Chen Si Zhong Ci, or this temple, is actually a building that was constructed in the late 19th century, between 1876 and 1878. It was an ancestral temple of the Tan clan, and since it was also gazetted as a national monument in 1974. So over the years, there are different custodians of the temple, and the temple fall into a sort of disrepair. And in 1999, so these are some other pictures. In 1973, you can see that over the years, the temple have changed so much. If you look at the boundary walls, the details have been simplified, right? And then in 2000s, in 1999 onwards, the temple trustee carried a series of changes without the submission of plans to the authorities, which subsequently led to the legal court case. So while this is the completed restoration, right? There are many changes to the building, primarily the colors of the roof tiles, changes of the ornamentation, additions to the ornamentations of the gable wall, the main hall, which is the second roof above, is elevated by at least around 1 meter, right? So there are actually very, very divergent ideas about what constitute restoration and conservation in this case. And in my opinion, is that it was actually based down to what is the idea of merit making. To the Tans, the idea of conservation and restoration is about merit making, right? To the authorities that adopted a kind of positivist approach, this is a illegal alteration. This example is not dissimilar to the example earlier which I shown, which is the divination implement. The ideas of what exactly is our vision of conservation. So I asked the question, does the positivist approach and the region tradition of practice needs to be antagonistic? So this is a question that I've been asking, how then we approach this issue. And this problem is not just unique to Singapore. During the last, in March, in a conference in Institute of Southeast Asia Studies, Yusof Ishak Institute, delegates from Southeast Asia were widely discussing this same problem about merit making versus conservation and preservation. I would like to illustrate with one example which was done in recent years. It's the restoration of Hong San Si Temple, which is done. This is prior to the recent restoration, how it looked like, and this is how it looked like further, which is oh sorry. This particular restoration is actually very quite interesting, and I do believe that this restoration perhaps will point out to to mend the difference between the positivist and the relativist approach in restoration. This temple restoration is a ground-up kind of restoration that is led by the Temple Restoration Committee. And it's of course, the Chinese committee knows about the earlier cases, the illegal restoration of Tansin Song Shu, and they would be not to repeat the same kind of legal problems that the committee has with differences in conservation. So what is very important is that they set up to set up a series of objectives and aims in terms of restoration. Here we are, is actually to rediscover social and architectural history, and more importantly, is to revive the community spirit in this shared heritage. And imbued in all this, in the objective action plan, is the idea of conservation as merit making. Right. So here we are. The entire roof is actually also newly made because, because in order to have the restoration taken place, you have to remove the roof to get down to the timber members, to repair the timber members. So while this is actually a process in traditional Chinese architecture, the intention is articulated to authorities that allow the reconstruction, the total reconstruction entire roof. What happened in the case of Tansin Song Shu is that there isn't a discussion between the owners and the authorities about the intention about traditional ways of doing things or construction versus the ideas and regulatory approach of an application of the laws. And here we have, we can see that the entire roof is taken down with the timber truss, the timber truss, and the timber truss then is being inspected for decay and a degradation, and was reinstated and pending after the entire roof is being reconstructed. And here you are, an image of the restoration team as well as the traditional craftsmen that restored the temple. So the idea of this restoration is not dissimilar to the temple in Japan, where it's actually the skill sets of the people that maintain the former temple. It's not really premises on the fabric of the building, but rather the form. But is it really about the difference between fabric and the form, or could that be a combination of the two answers, right? We privilege the fabric, we also privilege the form. It's depending on the context in which the building being restored. The same approach in restoration was then further taken on by another project, is the Yue Haiqing Temple, Wa Haiqing Bio, in 2012. This is the beam raising ceremony in 2012, where the same approach, where the setting up of objectives of what exactly is the restoration about, how is it not a renovation. The ideas is actually widely discussed to the community, to the owners, right? It's not about adding on to the building about merit making. It's a concept of restoration that will bring about merit to the people and to the owner, not dissimilar to the first case, the groundbreaking case of Hong San Si Temple. Right? So this is a axonometric drawing of before the restoration, and this is the axonometric drawing of the building after restoration. So while the accomplishment of these local projects are actually quite encouraging, I think it's actually also to be noted that the aims and result of much this restoration is rested upon the efforts of various parties involved, in the owners, the authorities, to enter into very meaningful discussion about the definition of restoration. What is restoration to the people? It's therefore not incomprehensible that because the positivist approach that was developed in the West and is therefore applied to the East, right, when we adopt the kind of methods, should be uniformly applied to all buildings in Singapore and in the region, especially when we are imbued with different religious and traditions in our culture. So in the Asian context, it's also very apparent that such an purist or positivist approach is rather inappropriate and maybe a challenge to be applied in its entirety. And therefore, it's about time that we took a balance between these two approaches and to rethink a kind of mental shift between the positivist and relative approach and towards the concept of merit making. So this is a very simple point that I would like to make in my presentation about the difference between East and West. It's not so much about the differences, but to find the similarities in having an open dialogue, honest discussion between various parties involved, and perhaps, especially for this region, the concept of merit making has to be reshifted, and we need to promote conservation as merit making. Thank you very much for my short presentation.